Okay, hi everyone. So welcome to our webinar today on software development as a career. I'm Anu, your host for today. I'm the founder of Stimulus Coaching and Mentoring. We work with individuals to help them find their passion, their right careers and educational paths. And today we are going to dive into software development as a career. In the past, we've talked about data and artificial intelligence. You can see that on our website, stimuluscoaching.wordpress.com. On our panel today, we have Amir Malik from Michael Page, who is head of the software development practice. And we have Sebastian, who's a developer, and he works with JavaScript and he works with Ruby, Rail, etc. So welcome on board, both of you. It's lovely to have you.
Sebastian.
Great. So as we kickstart, I wanted to talk about really, the boom that's continuing in the software development sector as a career. So even with the slowdown, it seems like the opportunities are still coming, companies are still hiring, and there's big projections behind this industry. For instance, Hired.com has said that, while there were 23 million software developers in 2018, by 2023, there's likely to be 27.7 million software developers. And I think some of it is evident because today businesses are run on software or on systems, and everything from ticketing to social media, everything seems to happen online, and all of which runs on code. And it seems logical that this trend should continue. So I just wanted to invite some thoughts on this. Amir, what have you noticed in terms of the industry trends?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Anu. I mean, look, I've been in recruitment for 14 years and I've always worked in the technology arena. I came to Michael Page about 4.5 years ago to actually focus on their software development function, because even back then I would say it was too late, but we noticed that there was a big trend that software developers are becoming in demand, and even more so in today's world. And I think it's only going to strengthen. I think what you find is technology now has very low barriers to entry. If you've got a good idea, it's very easy to get that idea into a conception. If you can find the right developer or development team, you can actually see it materialize very, very quickly. And now, even with the COVID situation, if you have a look at which businesses are hiring or actually increasing, they are technology-backed businesses. And if they can grow in such a difficult situation that we're finding globally, then can you imagine what it's like when economies are booming and people have got money to play with?
Yeah, it's fantastic, actually, that there are some promising sectors of hope, and that everything is not bleak, like the high streets almost come to a standstill and there's just layoffs and bad news. So at least technology is providing the kind of strength that's important for youngsters who's waiting to step into the field. I also wanted to ask you, in terms of what kind of programming languages you're seeing a demand for, and from where is this demand coming?
Sure. I think what's fascinating is this sort of cultural shift where we've had it in the last 20 years. And I put it down to the likes of Apple and Facebook. If you look back 20 years ago, the biggest players were people like Microsoft and Oracle and Java and what have you. But as we've transitioned and we've got into this millennial age, the internet now is the first and go-to resource. Traditionally, the open source community was seen as a very dark and closed arena. It wasn't trustworthy. People were very suspicious and scared. Whereas now, if you actually have a look at it, people are adopting open source far more than they would with an established enterprise technology like Microsoft. And that's fascinating, because for me, I'm thinking there's a lot of young entrepreneurs now. If you look at anyone who's under the age of 30, they are the ones that are driving the disruption or disruptive businesses. And the first thing they'll do is that they'll have very little capital to start with. And to work with traditional technology, they are very clunky, they're very expensive. Whereas the first thing you'll do is try to get as much as you can for free. And the open source world encourages that, and absolutely has created a platform for individuals to embrace and evolve. And once you start down an ecosystem with a product, you're very rarely going to migrate that to a Microsoft. So if you go with a potential language like JavaScript, you can more than likely stay with that. It's very rare for you to change, or even with something like Java. So for me, you'll find that the open source arena, anything that is Ruby, PHP, JavaScript, Java itself, are becoming far more available and popular. And what you've even found is Microsoft has had to adapt with their C# language, where they've gone and created a .NET Core platform that is now cross-platform, because they've seen that if they don't, they're going to get left behind.
Right. Sebastian, any thoughts on, what kind of languages are more in demand now? And any
myself, well, I've been in the software industry for around 8 years right now. And it's interesting because, I started with Java and C#, and later on I had opportunity to retrain myself in Ruby on Rails, which I then fall in love with. And I've spent many years in that language. Ruby on Rails is an open source language. And also what I've observed from the market is that there's simply not enough professionals in the market. And what I'm saying by that is that there's a huge demand from software companies for people with very specific skill set. And what I've observed also, being as someone who interviewed people, is to find a person with specific technology skill set. Sometimes it takes 3 to 6 months, where sometimes a company literally begs for an individual to be present in the market with specific technological skill set. Projects are being put on hold, largely because there's not enough people with very specific skill set. So there's definitely a huge opportunity for any person who's going to be going on this technology path of learning programming languages when expanding for their skill set, because I don't foresee any situation in the future where programmers will not going to be needed. Programmers are needed in every and each industry, from training to medicine to science. Some of the popular languages right now are, for example, Python. Ruby on Rails. With Python, it's being used primarily in data science and machine learning. And quite interestingly enough, and we hear it quite a lot recently about quantum computing. Quantum computing will be utilizing Python as a language to use for quantum computing. If you go, for example, to IBM and learn what they're doing right now in quantum computing, you're going to have tools and resources relating to Python language.
Okay. So we'll come back to the details of these languages in a bit, or maybe in another call. But I wanted to ask at this point about what are the skills that hirers are looking for? What are the companies asking for, apart from programming languages? So Amir, you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, what are some of the things they're asking for?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating spectrum. I think a lot of it depends on the background of the individual itself. The concept of, you tend to hire in your own image is still very true. If you find a developer, a development manager who has come through traditional methods of having a computer science degree, maybe learning a server-side language, and so on, and has progressed, they would potentially look for someone similar. Whereas if you find an individual who has sort of taught himself a language, or they've come the untraditional way, they're going to be far more open in recruiting and taking on individuals from that arena. So I think that's fascinating. What you'll also find is when people are recruiting, you've got to have some sort of portfolio. You've got to be able to demonstrate your coding ability. This is one of the reasons we don't actually do any testing for our developers, because what a great test is for one manager will look by another one and think, well, actually, I'm not so sure. So everyone will have their own interpretation of what a good coder is. but personality, I think that also can be a very key thing. I think if two developers can click, and i.e. they can communicate, they can share interests, and they're passionate about what it is that they do, you tend to find that those developers will go on to be more successful in interviews. I think it's really, really important that any developer can actually communicate passionately about why they code. I think if anybody's just doing code because it pays the bill, you know, they're not really going to be sought after.
Right. So communication seems like a big important skill to have. What are some of the other things that you do need, you know, apart from computing? You is the problem solving, there's analytical skills, etc. So what are some of these other bits that need to come together?
Sure. So problem solving, being a logical thinker, I think are some of the core fundamentals for any developer. It's true that anybody can learn to code, but then you'll find that there are different degrees of developers, and those that are problem solvers, logical thinkers, they tend to adapt very, very quickly. I think that certainly helps. And also be able to think outside the box. You know, I think that's also important, because a lot of the problems they're going to be coming across may not have been necessarily solved by someone. So if you can actually think outside the box, think of different solutions, look at things differently. Arrogant. I think arrogance is a big thing as well. Too many developers I've come across who think they are the best thing in sliced bread. Having some sort of humility and knowing that you're not always going to be right can also play a big part.
Also, there's a lot of teamwork required in delivering working code. So collaboration skills also, I think, are very key in this field, as in a lot of other fields, because you're working with the sponsors, the project managers, your testers, your BAs. So you do need to communicate and collaborate a lot, apart from the code that you write.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think it also depends on the size of the company. You see, if you're working for a very large organization with a very large development team. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. If you can hear, yeah, if you're working with a very large development team, developers can sometimes often hide. They can sit there with the hoodies on, headphones on, and they can hack away with some beautiful code. But there'll always come a point when working with a big team, you'll get frustrated because you'll never be given the access, the opportunity to go and do that little bit more. So if you want to be in an environment where you have a lot more exposure, you'll only ever get that in a small team. And to be efficient and work effectively in a small team, you've got to be a team player. You've got to be accommodating to other people's opinion, but at the same time, you've got to be confident in your own ability to speak up. So being a good team player will definitely put you in good stead, both in big companies, but more so in smaller businesses as well.
Right, thank you. And Sebastian, what have the skills been that have put you in good stead in your various jobs? What are some of the things that really helped you do well and deliver something in time?
I think number one thing was curiosity and ability to learn and adapt to different programming languages. But far more importantly, it's communication skills. It's ability to communicate with other people, because we're not only writing code. Actually, many times we're making very significant business decisions, and those decisions are being made in teams, by collaborating, by exchanging ideas, and as was being said, being a very good team player. And when it comes to making the decision whenever a software developer would be hired or not, the one important decision will be made if that person will fit into the team, even though the person might have a great programming skills for a genius level of problem solving, and if they're not a good team player, from my experience, they would not be hired.
Right. Yes, that's so important, isn't it? As in any team, not just a software. Yes, absolutely. Okay, and in your day-to-day job, how much time do you think you spend on the new coding aspects? And what is it that makes up the rest of your day on a typical basis?
I think, well, when it comes, well, to writing code, well, it's around 15 to 20% of the time. Much more time is being spent with understanding with the code, well, and also understanding the infrastructure where the code will sit well, because those decisions will have impact for years and years. You have to be very careful about what the solutions were that you're creating. And it's not only writing code, it's also writing tests, well, so that you're creating enterprise level software. Some of the other time, well, that what you spent much time in meetings, in speaking with other developers or with other stakeholders. So it's not only writing code. Well, communication is very vital part in software development.
Okay, thank you so much, Sebastian. Back to Amir. So, Amir, we were talking a bit about, what you need to do to get noticed. So, in your CV, does a university degree always stand out, or could you have gone through the ropes and done short courses and done a lot of development on the side? So, how do you make your profile stand out to the employer?
Sure. Look, I think depending on how experienced you are, I think if anyone who's got more than 10 years, university degrees aren't necessarily looked at in detail, right? They're more interested in the projects that you're involved in. But if we consider people up to about 5 to 6 years experience as an example, then of course they will be very interested to see, well, okay, let's have a look at the academic background of this individual. So in the UK, for example, they'll be considered to think, well, what do they do at A levels or BTEC? Did they go to college? Did they then go to university? And also what type of university and so on? And did they study traditional subjects like computer science or engineering? And the reason why, again, employers look at that, and it's going back to my original point, is that you always hire, or usually hire in your own image. If you've come from a strong computer science background, you will always give favoritism to someone like that. However, that is now not the case anymore. What you're finding is the world of, for example, JavaScript has actually opened up the arena to anybody and everybody. It's such a powerful language, but one that can be quite easily learnt, practiced, and actually put into implementation very quickly. You don't necessarily have to go through a 3-year degree in order to become a good developer anymore, especially with JavaScript. But regardless of which method or route you take, whether that be university or whether that you go to a coding school, for me, you need to be able to demonstrate application. You need to be able to demonstrate that what you have learned and those concepts, you can put it into practice, and ideally into real world practices. Far too many times I see people who go on courses and they build very meaningless apps like calculators. It's like, okay, great, but what did that really solve? There was one candidate who I placed recently, and what was fascinating was that he'd been working for 2 years. He did a computer games degree, but the job wasn't right for him, so he decided to take time out, right? And he actually spent 6 to 8 months building a website in JavaScript with React that was about identifying highly sought after trainers. So exclusive trainers, because he was someone who had a passion for trainers. And every time he used to go buy them, he would find that they would be sold out. So he actually spent time at home building a website that would help identify where these trainers are, how you can get them, and how you can purchase them. And for me, that was absolutely phenomenal. And when he went and interviewed for my client, the fact that he'd spent 6 to 9 months not working commercially, but because he had a real life project, a real life problem that he solved, it was as good as him working for someone. And he was only be able to do that because he saw a problem and he used his skills to solve the problem. So for me, it's very important that it doesn't matter how you've learned, take a real world problem, provide the solution, and it doesn't have to work. It doesn't have to work, but it gives you something to talk about at interview stage. And that's what's going to really impress, for me, clients.
Right. Well, that's a great point, actually, because everyone's looking for somebody who can actually deliver, do a job, rather than somebody who holds a degree, but when faced with a problem, he cannot really crack on with it. So experience is speaking louder than ever. And absolutely, I think it's important to have that portfolio and make that something that makes you stand out. The more real the problem that you've solved, the more suitable you might be to a hiring company.
and look, no one can deny a good education, and all that will do is having a solid academic education become you are just at lower risk, right? It
Yeah.
means that generally you are a good problem solver. So technically, you should be able to grasp concepts. Someone who hasn't gone to university doesn't have that background to say, well, actually, I was given very difficult problems and I solved them. And again, this is why I'm saying that if they can, in their own time, provide that evidence, then it becomes very difficult to argue against it. And especially if it's relevant to a client, it would probably put you in a stronger position.
Right. Sebastian, any thoughts on that, on going to university versus other ways of acquiring skills?
So I'm actually quite opinionated about it. Also because I went to university, and what I've learned is that many things that at the time I learned at the university, if I would adopt that mindset right now, it would actually lead to me being fired from various positions, simply because in many situations what university teaches and what businesses require is something very different. For example, in some of the universities, back then, it was still being taught a waterfall model, where any respectable company would use Scrum practices and agile development. So I do have a great respect, for anyone who took the time, created their own projects, will build up experience, not only because of the academic background. And right now you can have various boot camps that will teach you and will gonna help you creating that experience, creating that portfolio in as little as 3 months. I do not believe you have to spend 3 years or 5 years in software development degree to get into that industry. What is far more important is that you can demonstrate your experience and your knowledge, and you do that by having your portfolio, your website, and your GitHub account, where you can share the problems that you've solved. I do believe that in this age, apart from machine learning and natural language processing, a degree is not as important as it is for you to demonstrate what kind of experience do you have.
Sure. Yeah. So also, like as we were discussing, I think this is a very knowledge intensive industry and you need to be current with your knowledge. So going to a university where you spend 3 years and actually acquire skills that were relevant at that point 3 years ago or 2 years ago is not great for your employers. So the more current you are, and maybe you've topped up your university degree with more current training and more current skills, and you've built your portfolio, and you have the other skills of collaboration and communicating. So I think it's a whole package that the employers are looking at. And just by going to university, it doesn't assure you of anything in today's market. Is there anything else you would like to add, Amir, to what advice there is for people aspiring for a career on this line?
Yeah, I think the successful developers I have seen, and it depends on what you mean by success. Everyone has their own interpretation, but you should, and you've got a very unique opportunity to make it a passion. And it's one of the very few passions that you can get paid very well for. I can't say that's true about every job out there. A lot of people fall into their job. I mean, I fell into recruitment. I didn't wake up one day and thought I wanted to be a recruitment consultant. I fell into it, and the rest is history. But software development is an art and a science, and it's a very unique one. And it's one that is constantly evolving, adapting, and you can always be learning. And if you don't have that desire to better yourself, and you don't have that desire to keep up to recent trends and what's going on and how technology is moving and how you can look to continue better yourself, I do think you will get left behind, because there'll always be someone out there who's eager. So my advice would be that if you are in this industry, if you don't if you don't get a kick out of it, if in your spare time, you know, you're not doing something, I don't think you have to do everything in coding, but if you're not doing something or contributing to the community or wanting to evolve, you know, I think it can become very difficult. And those that do, they become head and shoulders above everybody else.
Right.
So try and make it a passion is what I would say.
Right. I think that, yes, absolutely. So I think it's been a very relevant discussion, and I thank you for the time and all the inputs you've brought to the table. I think we will catch up again on another, you know, more details of what's going on in the market, what kind of languages are in vogue, etc., in another meeting. So I hope to talk to you again very soon, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.